Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see everyone here live. I thought we'd just go through the second half of the Mishnah, which we sort of skipped out a little bit because we focused on the first half, and then the continuation of the Gemara. And really, what I say on the Mishnah is, in the sense, an introduction to after the two dots at the bottom of the Amud, when we'll actually start analysing the second half of the Mishnah. And pretty much, I'm just going to make some light comments. We're not going to go sort of profoundly in depth, but just sort of work up Pshat in the Mishnah, nothing more than that. So basically, the second half of the Mishnah introduces us to the idea of Muktza items that can be used for non-Muktza use. And basically, the Mishnah says that all of this is mutter. That's the context of the Mishnah, and it talks about a kardom, a cornice, a hammer, or I think a mallet, it's translated as, that can be used for cracking nuts, and an axe, which can be used for chopping a cake of figs, and so on and so forth. Now, Rashi in each scenario explains why you need this implement to do it. And I wonder what you make of this diuk, whether you think this is a good diuk or not. I'm in two minds myself. I think it's a good diuk, I'm not sure. Each time Rashi says, so let's look at Rashi, cornice, sorry, the next one, Tevela. So Rashi says, Me'achash asar igul avo, you make this cake of figs into a thick cake. Avo hima'oid, it's very thick, v'kosha, kuvina, and it's hard like cheese, like a hard cheese. So therefore it needs a kardom to cut it. So Rashi spells out that you need the kardom to do it. Then Rashi says, use a megera, which is a saw. Rashi says it's a knife with begimas, with indentations in. I think it's what we call a saw. Rashi says logobos agvina, to saw through the cheese. The chatcha the chalko, and then he says because it cuts quickly something that's thick. Then Rashi says on, for example, on liftorch be'esateles, to open the door with the needle of the sack makers. Rashi says misha ovad matecha, someone who's lost his key. So they've lost their key, and therefore they need a pin, I guess, to turn the what's it called in keys? To pick the lock, basically, yeah. To the pin, and then you need a thing to move the wheels of the key and the like. Why does Rashi in each case explain why this person is using this bizarre implement for doing it? Does it need this explanation of why they're choosing to do it, or if you wish to open your door with a needle, you're allowed to do so. If you wish to slice your cheese with a saw, you're allowed to do so. So it seems to me, and please don't jump on me for this diuk, there is a significant discussion in the poskim. Let's just headline say what this Mishnah is telling us. This Mishnah is telling us that you have something Muktza, like a hammer or a saw, and even so, you can use it for a non-Muktza use. So you can use a hammer to crack open the nuts, or saw to slice your cheese, or whatever the case may be. We're going to learn later in the Gemara that this refers to a certain type of Muktza, not all Muktza. But the bottom line is it's saying that's a klisha melachot isa, an implement who's normally Muktza because it's used for Muktza use, nonetheless is allowed l'tzorech gufay, is allowed if you do have a non-Muktza or non-prohibited use for it. And I think you discussed in the chaburah the categories of Muktza and how this works out. But this is the bottom line of what the Mishnah is saying, that since it's a kli, it's not something that's not a kli at all. We're not talking about a stone over here. We're talking about a kli. Therefore, it's always made for use. When we refer to a kli shemelachta leisa as Muktza, we simply mean it's generally Muktza because its general use is a non-permitted use. But if I find for it a permitted use for Shabbos, I'm allowed to use it. Now, does that mean l'chatchila? It's completely okay to use. There's no reason. If I have in my house a regular cheese slicer and a saw, if I so choose, I can use the saw on Shabbos, and there's no reason not to do it because it's not Muktza with respect to that use. Or does it mean it still has a lingering element of Muktza-ness to it? All it means is if I have no option, I'm allowed to use it because ultimately it's a kli. I think I don't have a regular cheese slicer, so I have to use a saw. I don't have a regular nutcracker, so I have to use the hammer. But I shouldn't use it stum for no reason. If I'm stuck, I should use my key. I shouldn't use a needle to pick the lock. I should use a key if I have a key. So there's two models of how you can understand this allowance to use a klisha melachot issa for a permitted use. One model is it's completely allowed. It's not muktza with respect to that. The other model is it is muktza. It's a muktza item. If I have no choice, since ultimately it's a kli, I can use it. And this is a very real nafkamina la halacha. The allowance to use muktza items for non-muktza purposes is at lechatchila, only when I'm stuck. That's the shaila la halacha. And this shaila is down to, goes down to the edge. I mean, it's the Mishnah Berurah discusses it. It's there as a cutting edge shaila. When I saw Rashi, he began making me think a little bit of this shaila. And I don't know what you make of this diuk. You could argue this whole diuk is nonsense. Rashi's just being helpful. He's explaining why would people use such bizarre artifacts to do what they're doing. Why on earth would you use a saw to saw through cheese? Why would you use an axe to chop cakes of figs? This is ridiculous. Why would you use a needle to open locks? The answer is because you lost the key, because the tvela is very tightly packed and very hard, because the cheese is you want to do it fast, and a saw is a quicker of doing it than any other methods. That's one way of answering Rashi. I'm not convinced, because from a halachic point of view, none of that is relevant. For whatever reason, for some reason you want to use a saw because you enjoy using saws, because you that's nearer to you, and you're lazy, and the saw is right next to the cheese, and this is in the shelf in the drawer in your kitchen. You can't bother to go inside. Who cares what the reason is? Why is Rashi explaining this reason? So I think tentatively that Rashi, we have a subtle diuk in Rashi. The Rashi is saying there has to be a reason why you want to use the hammer to crack the nut, not to crack it. There's a reason why you're using the saw to slice the cheese, not a regular knife, utensil to do it. If there's no reason, it wouldn't be allowed because it's not lechatchila. I think Rashi is in the camp of those who think it's not lechatchila to use muktza items for non-muktza uses. That's my tentative diuk. Yes.
Just looking at it now, you could argue the other way around even in Rashi, because the first and third case, it was absolutely right. He says there's no choice. The middle case, he says my harris. The deal being that if you wanted to do it a bit slower, then use a regular knife.
I think the answer is that that's enough of a reason to do it. In other words, Rashi's not saying it's impossible to do without, but there has to be a good reason for doing it. Yeah, I hear your point. It's a fine pushback on my point. Something I have to think about. Yeah. It's a very, very fine response. Okay, so anyway, I present that to you for you. I'm not 100% convinced of it. It's the nuance of the language of Rashi inspires in me that thought. So I'm not saying it's a knockout blow. I wish I was enough of an expert on Rashi throughout Shas to know if there's any rise either way. But certainly if we found a contradiction in Rashi, I'd be quite happy to backpedal from this diuk. But to me, it seems that Rashi at least makes us think. Maybe there has to be at least a reason, maybe not impossibility, but some reason for using a muktza item on a klisha melachot issa on Shabbos. You can't just be doing it at a whim because you just choose to do so because you want to do it. That's a thought. And I'll just mention another. I just think very interesting, or just as a sort of beautiful piece of clear reasoning rather than anything else. Again, it's not my own. I saw this in one of the Sorim. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to. I enjoyed this because I've never thought about it before. The Mishnah says you're allowed to slice cheese on Shabbos with a saw. Why are you allowed to slice cheese at all on Shabbos? Let me contextualize that question. If you remember when we were learning the small melachos, one of the examples I kept on using is Megavin Misha Megavin. The Gemara says, ties into the later sugya, that making cheese out of curdling milk to make cheese, I don't know much about cheese making, but basically when you make cheese, you take a liquid milk and somehow you cause it to coalesce into a hard block. And the Gemara says that's a tolda of boineh. We used it as one of our case studies of how toldas can be quite different to the av melacha when we looked at this. If cheese making is not allowed on Shabbos because it's boineh, then why isn't cheese slicing not allowed on Shabbos because it's soisa? This is a question that one of the HaKelim asked, and I enjoyed the question just because it's not something that that's ever really thought about. Very good. Well, useful answer. I'll come back to it in a minute. He said you're not unmaking the cheese. I completely missed this answer, I have to confess. And yes, yeah, and excellent. Everyone's on a roll. Yeah.
So this is going to be Isn't it has to be enough with notes?
Very nice answer. Okay. So the first answer I saw was that sosa is only osa min haTorah if it's almanas livnos. All melachos have to be constructive. The background to this is all melachos have to be constructive. Destroying something is not constructive. What makes dismantling a building constructive? Because you're planning to reconstitute the parts in some slightly different manner or something like that. It has to be sosa almanas livnos. Now, when you slice the cheese, it's not almanas livnos. It's a very good answer. You could attack that answer by saying it's true, but all sosa is still osa midrabanan. And the response to that could be that regular sosa is osa midrabanan because there's confusion because sometimes you dismantle to rebuild, sometimes you don't. But cheese slicing, which you never do to rebuild, by definition, wouldn't be included in the drabanan. That would be a good answer. So this is what I originally went through. I think, though, and this is why I enjoyed your answer, I think there's a more profound answer. In other words, I think there's messy thinking going on over here. I mean, one doesn't need to come on to almanas livnos, even though it's a perfectly reasonable answer, which is we've sort of missed the point. The point of cheese making isn't that you're just sticking pieces together and therefore slicing a sosa. The point is you're making cheese. We've missed... Again, I want to emphasize this point just as quick chazara on Ovis and Toldos. There's 39 Ovis melachos. Before you learn Masechet Shabbat, you think that Toldos are simply other examples of doing the Av or other permutations of doing the Av. That's incorrect. Toldos look very different to Ovis. They're their own activity. Pruning, says the Gemara, is a Tolda of notea. When you plant a tree or zorea, you sow a seed, you cause it to grow. When you prune, you engender growth in the tree through pruning back the branches. Pruning is its own activity. There's nothing even superficially similar between it and sowing a seed. It's a completely different human asec. However, since its asec is trying to get a tree to grow, it's a tolda of the Av. We saw a Yerushalmi that says that Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish that led us to understand that it really works the other way around. The Gemara or the Chazal understood certain melachos are melachos, and now we have to work out which one they're a tolda of, which category they fall under. They understood that certain achievements are achievements. The Gemara in the Bavli says that Megavin is also Mishum Megavin. It's true Megavin, cheese making, is a tolda of Bona, but its name, the status of Malacha is Megavin. It's not just another way of putting pieces together where you can sort of say every bit of the cheese is put together, and therefore if I'm slicing, I'm separating the bits. It's cheese making is combining and creating a solid out of the liquid into a form is the melacha. When I slice cheese, I'm not unraveling the cheese making. The cheese making remains. I still have a solid. It's just a smaller piece of solid. There's no size to how big a lump of cheese has to be. It's just a smaller piece of solid. I'm not reversing it back to liquid. I think that was your Gary and Shmueli's intuition over here. And in a sense, it's a more profound answer than the original answer I came up with, and that you're saying. It's a perfectly accurate answer, but this is undermining the whole question. It's a ridiculous question, really. It's not sosa. It remains cheese, and I just share that with you because I thought it was what was an important point.
You have to be careful not to make equal divisions of the cheese that will actually be the
Yeah, I'll just mention maybe a couple of other horrors before we move on. What should I say now? Just I'll leave most of my others. I'll say one more and then we'll move on to the Mishnah just because I want to move on to the Gemara. The Mishnah says that Masechet Shabbat you're allowed to use not a sack maker's needle, which I think is a very coarse and strong needle, but a domestic needle, which is a little fine toothpick type thing. You're allowed to use in order to remove a thorn from in order to remove a thorn. Now, what's the head of the Mishnah? Because it's a kli shemalachtu le'isa, it's Muktza, and the Mishnah is telling us that you're allowed to use that type of Muktza for mutter uses. That's the mitzvah. Now, just as a bit of background. There is a Gemara that actually a Tosfos really in Daf Kuf Zayin that says that asks why are you allowed to remove thorns on Shabbos at all? There's an issa of chaburah, of creating a wound or an injury in oneself. It's a tolda, by the way, of shchita. One of the lamatas melachos is ending a life, shochet. I think we learned it when we looked at the chilozin techeles manufacture. and there is a tolda of shchita, which is chaburah, which is extracting blood or injuring oneself. And when you remove this thorn, you're invariably causing a little bit of bleeding and maybe taking a little bit of skin with it and so on. So how can you remove thorns on Shabbos? It should be a tolda. So Tosfos answers, it's true that it is a tolda, and therefore also min haTorah. However, it's a melacha shein tzrich legufa. You're not doing the malacha, your intent in doing the malacha isn't to remove blood or to remove skin. You're not doing an operation. Every malacha needs to be malacha shetzrich legufa. You're doing it for the primary purpose of the malacha. I'm doing the malacha because my purpose is to remove blood or remove skin. For example, as in the chilazon, I want to extract the blood of the chilazon to create a dye. That would be a malacha shetzrich legufa. Or I want to do bloodletting. That would be malacha shetzrich legufa. Or I want to do a bris milah, in which the whole purpose is to remove the skin from the body. That would be chaburah melachot shetzrich legufa. Here, I'm not doing it with that positive intent. I want to remove the thorn, and with it comes some blood, whatever it may be. Therefore, Tosfos says it's only an issa drabanan, and they allowed the issa drabanan because of tsar, because of pain. So this leads us to the question of why do you need to allow the use of this needle, which is Muktza, because of melacha, because of even Muktza is allowed for an asa melacha. Even Muktza is allowed when I'm using it for a permissible purpose. Muktza is an issa drabanan, and we've just seen that you're allowed to do something for pain as a issa when there's an issa drabanan. So again, just to summarize, the whole of removing of the thorn is an issa drabanan, and we allow it because of pain. So why is this needle permitted? Because of this chiddush that you're allowed to use Muktza items for pain alleviation. You're allowed to use Muktza items for a Muktza purpose. You would be allowed to use Muktza items because of pain relief, because a drabanan is suspended in the case of pain. Let me put this differently. Imagine I had something which wasn't a kli melachot l'issa, it wasn't a machat, and something which was genuinely completely Muktza. Would I be allowed to use that to extract the thorn from myself? Something that's completely Muktza, not a kli melachot l'issa, something that's completely Muktza, right? So a stone, a sharp stone. I have a thorn in my skin, and the only thing I can find to take it out is a sharp stone. Would I be allowed to use a needle-shaped stone? Right? I find a stone that comes to a point. Am I allowed to use that to take the thorn out? The answer would be yes, because you're allowed to transgress the drabanan in a situation of pain. That's the whole allowance of taking the thorn out is built on being allowed to do the drabanan in a situation of pain. So why is the Mishnah here giving this as an example of a kli melachot l'issa, that you're allowed to use something which is Muktza for an issa, but Muktza for a mutter need is allowed, even if Muktza for mutter need wasn't allowed, or it's completely Muktza like a stone. Is everyone with me? Does this? Yeah. Now, the answer you could give to this question could be that the Mishnah is telling me something else. It's telling me even if I have an alternative, I would be allowed to use the Muktza item, because it's not Muktza with respect to mutter uses. I wouldn't be allowed to use the stone, which is Muktza. You can only suspend a drabanan when you have no choice. So if you have a mutter item to take the thorn out, you wouldn't be allowed to use the stone to take it out. The Mishnah is telling me that this is a kli melachot l'issa, and therefore it's mutter l'chatchila. This brings us back to our original discussion. Is the pshat in kli melachot l'issa that is like it's not Muktza with respect to mutter uses, and therefore it's allowed l'chatchila, there's no, in which case the Mishnah would fit? Or is it that kli melachot l'issa is when I have no choice in now to use it, in which case we have a difficulty in the Mishnah. If I have no choice to use it, then I could even use something that's genuinely Muktza, because it's suspended because of tzar. What do we think about that? So interesting. I think one could argue this. One could say that the Mishnah is telling us that it is better to use the machat to take the thorn out than the stone to take the thorn out, because the machat at the end of the day is a kli melachot l'issa, whereas the stone is complete Muktza and therefore isn't allowed to be used at all. So again, it's just we'll get back to these points later. So if this is left you confused, I apologize. But again, just to summarize what we've taken out of the Mishnah, there's something which is profoundly Muktza, completely Muktza, is not a kli at all. That can't be used even for mutter needs. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that kli melachot l'issa, something which is a utensil, even though it's Muktza, because normally the utensil is used for other things, like needles are used for sewing or hammers are used for building, nonetheless can be used for a mutter needs. That's the summary of what we bring out from the Mishnah. Let's move on to the Gemara just in the little bit of time available, and just try and run through the next bit of Gemara. Where's my Gemara gone? I'm sorry. Any questions, thoughts about the Mishnah just before we move on? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So the Gemara discusses the Brisa. The Brisa says that Dalas shall Shiur v'shal Teva v'shal Migdal Noitlin aval lo machziyun. Shel Tana Golim lo Noitlin lo machziyun. So basically, the Gemara's question is Lul shel Tana Golim is binyan, and therefore you're neither allowed to attach nor detach the Dalas, the door, because that would be boina on Shabbos. By the way, I was speaking to someone last night, a learned person last night, who argued that boina is one of the most easily transgressed melachos on Shabbos. Boina is endemic, by the way. What we're going to learn now is very, very important halachas. And if you understand boina, you realize there's all sorts of things which are not intuitively melachos that could be also. Bishul, even though the halachas of Bishul are fairly complicated, and we often left, can I warm this up on Shabbos? Can't I? Do I need to blech? Don't I need to blech? There's so many drabonons built around Bishul that it's quite hard to actually transgress the Deraison. Everyone realizes you're not going to take something raw and put it on the flame to cook for hopefully, cook for Shabbos. Whereas Bona is all over the place. If you have a picture that's fallen off the wall and you hang it back on the wall, if you have your net curtains have come down and you stick them back up, if you have in Israel they have these sponger holes with sponger plastic covers. Do you know what I'm talking about? If you stick something into the ground that to block a hole, there's bonas all over the place on Shabbos. So these are very important halachas. So the Gemara here says that a Lul shel Tana Golim, reattaching the door, if a door comes off the hinge and you attach it, this is the melachot d'oraisa bona, and so says certainly you're not allowed to attach or detach the door. The Gemara asks, what's the debate? What's the chiluk between being allowed to remove the door off the Shiur Teva Migdal, off the cupboard or the box, and not being allowed to reattach it on Shabbos? Make up your mind. If there's binyan b'kedim, then it should be also to attach and detach. If ain't binyan b'kedim, then it should be mutter to attach and detach. So Rava answered that ain't binyan in Shiur b'kedim. There is no binyan in Shiur b'kedim, and the reason is a gezerah shema yitzka. A gezerah lest you attach it firmly. I just heard you, Adam, talking to Josh on when you were learning, saying it's not. I'm not entirely clear, and I don't know if anyone is exactly what this tekiah is. What's the firm attachment that you're doing? But somehow you're not just placing it on a. It seems that you have some sort of hinge or something where it just sits on the hinge. You're actually attaching it firmly. The modern day scenario they talk about is when you screw something in. I'm not sure when screws were only invented in the I think in the 1600s or so. I mean that's when the posting began speaking about it. The realization that if you have a thread that winds round and round, that can be quite a good way of attaching things. I'm not sure what tekiah Shema Yitzka means in the language that the Rishonim uses.
Full repair.
Conceptually, you're right. That tekiah means it's somehow strongly attached and therefore full repair and therefore is binyan. Whereas without tekiah, it's not. But I'm not sure what the actual tangible difference is in how they do it. I don't know. Yeah.
Whether Natila is both moving and removing, or whether it's only removing it. Because we start out in the beginning of the mission saying it's moving,
right?
And then, but when we come further down about removing the stira.
Right, I missed this point. You're right. It's clear in the Brisa the Gemara is understanding it as removing, but it's confusing because we use the same language of Natila to refer to moving in the context of Muktza. Yeah, so it's a good point. It's a confusing use of language. The word can be used for both. It seems unfortunate that it's used here in both contexts. Sorry, Adam. Yeah. 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 The language can be used for both. I don't think Tosfos clarifies why here. It's a confusing use of the phrase in the very context of Muktza. You firmly l'tchov means you firmly drive it in. Yes, as you said, you firmly insert it or something like that. Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what this means. It seems there are two ways of reattaching the door. Either if a hinge basically is a circle with a rod and it rotates on the rod, that's how a hinge works. So it seems that I'm not even sure if we're talking here about a hinged cover or some other form of cover. But it seems if you just attach it onto the rod, that would be what's mutter. And if somehow it's tochuv, so it's like maybe it's like a thicker rod where it is tightly sealed or something like that, such it can't be easily removed again, that would be tchiva. But I'm not exactly sure what the Minad Alma over here of the difference between the two are. Either way, Rashi says that the melacha over here is not boiner but makeh b'patish. That's the melacha of tkiya, because whether it's loosely attached or firmly attached, ein binyan v'stira b'kelim, and therefore boina is not a relevant category over here. And all that's relevant over here is makeh b'patish, because even with kelim, of course, makeh b'patish is the melacha about kelim. You're finishing off the keli, you're fixing it, and that's tikkun mona, that's repairing something or finishing something off, and therefore that would be the melacha over here, and that resolves the issue of binyan and stira kelim. And it wouldn't be, if it was loosely attached, it wouldn't be called makeh b'patish because you've just reattached it loosely. But if you firmly attach it, that's now completing it, and therefore that would be makeh b'patish. That's how Rashi resolves the difference. Yeah.
Can you start? Is this Rashi just being mafarish of Rava, or Rashi explaining his opinion?
It's Rashi being mafarish Rava. Rashi understands that the way Rava escapes from the trap of makeh b'patish is of boina b'kelim is because it's makeh b'patish. Yeah. By the way, most Rishonim, I didn't print all the sources, but as far as I can see, most Rishonim go with Rashi. They say that the melacha over here is makeh b'patish, and that's how we resolve the problem of binyan b'kelim. The Rambam says, I think I printed the Rambam in the source sheets. Rambam Perik, where is it in source 2? Says that hatakea chayiv mishum boineh lefichach kol hadolosas mechbaros hakaka lenotlim isam lemachzirin gzer shem yitzka zal sheshet tov mikdol shadolosas hakelim notlim lemachzirin nishmat tzei tachten shalem terchin osin mkomet. So there's many elements that are confusing in the Rambam, but the Rambam seems to say that takea is mishum boineh rather than mishum makeh b'patish, and then the Rambam seems to say that that's only with something which is mechubar karka, but not with something which is not mechubar karka, which doesn't seem to fit our Gemara, because our Gemara seems to be saying that takea is a problem with kelim, not with. There's really 3 problems on the Rambam. The Rambam says that takea is chayiv mishum boineh. Problem number 1 is he says this is only with mechubar karka. And the whole point of Rava is that it's even with something that's not mechubar karka. That's the whole point of Rava. And generally, the rule is we passing like Rava against Abaya. So we would have expected the Rambam to pass like Rava. And Rava holds that takea is even a problem with kelim. So this is problem number 1 in the Rambam. Problem number 2 is he seems to say that takea is only a problem. The mechubar karka is only a problem when it's takea. And our Gemara seems to be saying that even without takea, boina is a problem over here with mechubar karka. As the whole point of the Gemara is that with non-mechubar karka you need to come onto takea, whereas with mechubar karka you don't need to come onto takea. So that's the second problem of the Rambam. Third problem of the Rambam is that if the problem is boina, then it becomes unclear why you can remove the door, because if it's boina, then removal ought to be soisa, whereas if it's makeh b'patish, we understand why attaching the door is makeh b'patish, detaching the door isn't makeh b'patish. Makeh b'patish is a non-symmetrical halacha. Many halachas are symmetrical in some shape or form, kaisev and mochek, and lighting a fire and putting out the fire, and so on and so forth. But mavi and mechaber, but makeh b'patish by definition is a non-symmetrical halacha. Completing a utensil is a melacha. Unraveling the completion of the utensil is not a melacha. So if the answer to the Gemara is makeh b'patish as per Rashi, the Gemara has got itself out of the problem and it's explained why noitlin ve'ein machzirin. But if tokea means it's boina, then the Gemara is back in the problem of why is noitlin a problem and not a mutter and machzirin is osa. So those are the 3 problems of the Rambam. And basically, we'll leave it here for now because we've run out of time today. But have a look at the Beis Yosef and the Bach that I printed, who try and unravel these questions. I don't promise you much nachas by the end. In other words, I'm not sure I completely understand their resolution to everything. But it's important for the thorough learning Gemara. Without ruining the punchline, basically, I don't know the answers to these questions. The Rambam remains a mystery. But I'll check. But have a look at what the Beis Yosef and the Bach say as an attempt to solve these problems. And I'll try and send some more sources for Tuesday, Mitzvah Hashem, but that's the program for where we'll start with and share on Tuesday. So some good marketing for next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any significance to Rashi inverting the order of Sheva and Sheva?
Oh, not that I know of. I don't know why he does that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question.